Hi, I'm Rita Savasco.
And I'm Maura Krzyzanowski, and we're from Rooted in Language.
Today we're going to talk about dyslexia, how we can help and offer you hope. Just so you know, at Rooted in Language, we provide research-based, multisensory strategies for typical and struggling learners.
We focus on giving you, the educator, the tools you need to help your students with language arts.
Dyslexia is a complicated disorder in which students have a difficult time getting the automatic sound-to-letter connections that they need in order to become fluent readers and writers.
Yeah, practice must be very multisensory and teaching must be very explicit. And we have to really focus on phonics and helping kids build really strong sound-to-letter connections.
So we have to help kids learn how to apply those skills to both reading and writing, and we work on those skills together.
Yes. Today we're going to demonstrate for you 3 research-based strategies to help you teach your struggling reader.
Right. And to do that, we're going to use one of our products called Sound Bugs. And we have Sound Bugs because we have set up a situation where the kids learn by manipulating these bugs, these bug parts, that sounds. Each sound is represented by one or more letters. The way we've set up the bugs is we've oriented them so that they have a head, a body, and a tail, so that students learn this left to right orientation.
Right.
They also learn that one letter can represent a sound, as in this example, B. And eventually they learn that 2 letters can represent a sound, as in this CK. And so students get used to the idea, and we teach the idea that they are listening for sounds and they're building as they hear sounds. They're building bugs as they hear sounds.
You'll also notice that some of these sounds are only written in certain positions, like CK is a spelling that we only ever see at the very ends of words, so it would only go on a bug tail. And these kinds of things really help students begin to build those associations with reading and with spelling and make those strong connections. So one of the things I'm going to show you today is how we would use the bugs to practice reading or decoding. And with that, we will always be using bugs that we've pre-written letters on, okay? So what we've done is we've laminated and cut out these bugs. We wrote a bunch of letters on them. We put certain letters on heads, bodies, and tails based on spellings that can show up in those positions. And then we practice having kids build and read words to really work on strong processing of sound from left to right, segmenting all the sounds in a word, and then blending all those sounds together to read that word smoothly. So, for example...
Can I just interrupt for a minute?
Sure.
And we also tend to separate out our vowel sounds and keep them together so that kids get this idea that vowels are different than consonants.
Right. Sometimes you might even put all your vowels on a single color if you really want to help students build that strong concept that all of these kind of go together. You can use the bugs because there's so many different colors. You can start to make some of those color associations if you want in how you write your letters on them. So I am going to build a word. If this was a really young child, I'd probably be working on 2 or 3 sound words. So I might give a child a word like big, and they would have to say B, I, G. And then I often have them practice segmenting one more time, sometimes by like pushing each sound again or pulling each sound toward them so they can practice really tracking and getting those strong connections. B, I, G. And then we might swipe our finger underneath and work on blending the sounds together. Big.
And if you notice, Maura has only provided here a limited set of letters to choose
These
from.
are obviously not all of our letters or spellings, right? Yes. So you would do that and sort of bump that up as you're teaching more to your student. More is kind of in their repertoire and what they might have to choose from for this kind of activity. You can up the ante as students learn more and more by starting to build words with more sounds. One very difficult thing for students with dyslexia is words with blends, which means we might have 2 consonants that kind kind of blend together, and students might really struggle to kind of blend smoothly through sounds like that, or even really notice that there are two sounds there in a word, because we tend to kind of say things like sl or sk really quickly. So this is something that's really important to practice with manipulatives to help kids really track and break down all the sounds they actually are processing in a word. So I could give a word like slap, and they would have to pull down and say as they pull, s, o, ah, p, s, o, ah, p, slap. Really, really good processing work.
So as I mentioned, when students have dyslexia, they have a difficult time with this sound to letter connection. So as Maura was manipulating these bugs and building these bugs, she was really reinforcing that this is representing s and this is representing ol. And then also that we then have to hear those sounds individually and then also blend them together, as she was saying.
For smooth reading.
And it's very difficult for kids to do this when it's written on paper. They need to learn it in this multisensory way. And it's just a strategy that you never want to skip.
Exactly. We also want to show you the importance of working on words that have those, what are sometimes called digraphs or consonant teams or maybe vowel teams, where you have to make a strong connection that these two letters are actually working together to make one sound. Students with dyslexia often really struggle with these kinds of concepts. So you can work on words like thick, k, k. Now, I want to show you too, there's an opportunity for a mistake here, because at the point in which we learn CK, we also have probably learned a couple other sounds that can make the k sound. But what you'll notice in the available letter set here is that the only other option for that k sound was a single K, which cannot go here because why? It's a bug head, so it doesn't make any sense. I knew I needed an ending sound. I now see that this CK is on this little bug behind, so that reinforces a phonics concept of CK being one sound, but also a spelling rule that CK is an ending sound that has a rule for when we use it after vowels.
Right, so there are programs out there that use manipulatives, but we developed these bugs in particular because we really wanted this left to right orientation.
Right.
And we want to reinforce when certain spellings can only be in the beginning of a word and what certain spellings can only be at the end of the word.
Well, and certain spellings might be able to be in two different spots, and therefore you can have them in two locations, right? You can have a TH on a head and a TH at the end.
But as we said, it's very important to work from both reading and writing simultaneously. And so we do that by having blank bugs for kids to write on.
So our second strategy is using manipulatives to work on spelling. So the blank bugs basically allow you to work on this same kind of tracking of sounds from left to right, making that really strong, those strong connections, working on segmenting, working on blending, but in spelling because they don't have the letters already written there. So this will look a lot like teacher or educator dictating words to the student. The student has to process how many sounds they hear by pulling down the appropriate number of bugs, and then they have to apply their spelling skills by saying their sounds as they write on the bugs to spell a word. So if I gave a word like slap, they would have to say s, o, ah, p. Got my marker. S, o, ah, p. And then again, I might reinforce that processing from left to right by having them segment again. S, o, ah, p. And now blend, slap. Okay. We'll do one more example for you. If I gave a word like keep, k, e, you might have a student who's envisioning two letters, but they only hear one sound, so they only get one body. K, e, p. What we have here is a visual representation of a word that your student may or may not know has 4 letters, but only has 3 sounds because of how we group sounds, all right? K, e, strategy. 2 letters go on one body. P, k, eep, keep. All right. So that is our second strategy for you.
So our third strategy, we want children to move into eventually writing on paper, not just using manipulatives. So we have an intermediate step when we work with marker boards. So I'm going to grab some of my markers here and my marker board. We find that students who struggle with reading and writing see writing with a marker board as a multi-sensory experience, and they're a little more open to the process of making this transition from moving a manipulative to actually putting pen on paper. So we use our marker board to help them make that transition, but we're still focusing on this sound to letter connection. And we do that by giving them a new representation. Our representation is lines. We call this strategy using sound lines. And we teach kids that every sound is represented by a line. So if I wrote a word, I would show a student that they could read that word by underlining the sounds. At. But I also would use lines to teach students that they can spell words. And that's what I'm going to show you today. So I might give a student a word like big. And they have to decide how many sounds do they hear. B, I, G.
Now the educator or the student can be drawing the lines. You can start off where they say the sounds and you're drawing a line for them, maybe if they're barely, writing or doing that and they're kind of getting used to this. And then later on, we really switch to having students be the one to draw those lines. That really forces them to process how many sounds did they hear in the word big before they just start spelling.
Right. So we want them to be able to hear a word and identify how many sounds, and that's what I was representing here. And so the student draws the lines B, I, G. Before they even have to spell, they had to identify how many sounds they heard. So now we say the word again, big, and they know that they need to represent every sound on a line and say the sounds as they write. B, I, G. And that's how we use sound lines to help students when they are learning to spell. And it helps them see, hey, I have this information and I can use this information when I'm writing. If they make an error, it's easily erased. And the colors make the whole experience a little more multisensory. So we would do the same thing when we have 2 letters that represent one sound. So if I say to the student, your new word is the word thick. And you have to say each sound as we draw our lines. I, k. And the student, again, would count out each of their sounds, draw their lines, and then they would write their sounds and say their sounds as they write. I. And then I have them underline to show sound blending. Thick. Okay? If a student made an error, the advantage of using the marker board is we can go back and work on that error, and erasing's not a problem. It's all pretty neat, and we can work on this final CK after the short vowel sound, which is a common spelling rule. And we teach our spelling rules very explicitly, and we practice those spelling rules on the marker board. It's big, it's neat, it's very colorful, and kids are making these sound to letter connections and getting them
practiced in reading and writing.
On paper, in writing, but we're starting at this marker board level. So again, 4 sounds, s, o, a, p. I said the word first, slap, the student draws the 4 lines, and then they have to spell it. S, o, a, p. At Rooted in Language, we teach a class called Laying the Path, Phonics and Spelling, where we take you through all of these step by step, and we also help you understand what to do when, for example, if a child doesn't hear that L sound and they just write
Sap.
this, sap, instead of slap. So these are all common errors that kids who struggle with this language to sound connection, they struggle with these kinds of errors, and we have specific ways we deal. And what you saw today were 3 of our main strategies that we could share with you.
Right. So these were 3 great strategies to practice reading accuracy and spelling accuracy for students who struggle with reading and writing. And we want you to remember 3 main things from today's video.
Yes.
The first thing is to teach very explicitly. Everything must be taught explicitly. We can't expect students to just sponge things up from what they hear and in reading books to them. You know, those things are all excellent. They do build vocabulary, they do build engagement with language, but reading and writing must really be taught explicitly. It's a whole new code that they must learn.
Especially for the struggling reader and writer who has dyslexia or dysgraphia.
Right.
We also use this multi-sensory approach because they need to learn this difficult skill for them, and the more senses they can pull in that learning process, the more progress they'll make.
And then finally, make learning as visual and enjoyable as possible. One of the great benefits of the bugs, in addition to being very multi-sensory, is that it's a visual representation of the kinds of things that we need our brain to really be understanding. It's also very colorful and enjoyable. Kids get to move things around, and it makes learning very sticky, which is something we say that means they remember it. They make those deep connections. That really helps them then progress without feeling like you keep teaching a bunch of things that are getting lost.
Right. So thanks for joining us today, and visit our website for more help.